Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
9 minutes before 8 is the time. We'll come back to your views of those numbers. And the good news that for 6 days now, of course, still caution being expressed, the COVID cases falling. But let's come to that other story I mentioned when we went through the newspapers. And I'm joined by Conservative MP and Crime and Policing Minister Kit Malthouse. And the headlines are in: crackdown on crime. I'll make yobs clean the streets, says Pretty, as in Patel. PM gets tough on burglars. Freed burglars to wear 24-hour tags. Minister, I've been reading these sort of headlines for more than the last 10 years. Why should we believe them this time? Good morning.
Well, good morning, Governor. Hopefully you'll believe them this time, not least because you and I have got form on crime. And when I was last, I guess, a frequent appearer on your show 10 years ago, I was working on crime in London, I hope successfully, and we're trying to bring some of those techniques and motivation to crime now. As you will know, over the last couple of years, we've been really focused on trying to drive crime down. That was interfered with somewhat by COVID, where we saw patterns of crime change, and we obviously had to focus on protecting the public from the virus as well. But coming out of that, the Prime Minister wanted to restate the mission, illustrate what we've been doing, particularly on drugs and county lines and violence, where there's a particular problem, and then point the voyage, if you like, on crime forward into the future, adding to it the fulfillment of some basic expectations that the public have of the police around levels of kind of customer service that we want to see improve, on top of us getting underneath the skin of crime and really driving these numbers down.
All right, I'll ask you what the plan, Beating Crime plan, means in just a moment, but you say you've been working hard to crack down on crime. This year, police recorded over 2 million incidents of antisocial behaviour. That's the highest in 7 years, and crime survey data reveals 13.6 million adults have witnessed or experienced antisocial behaviour in the last 12 months. You're not doing a very good job of it, are you?
Well, it's definitely the case, Nick, that we've seen a surge in ASB related to lots more people being at home and lots more people being in their neighbourhoods over the last few years. And one of the things that we've got in the plan is a focus on antisocial behaviour, bringing a sort of geographic analysis, trying to identify those areas through data that are most likely to have antisocial behaviour visited upon them, and then bringing police and crime commissioners and our heft towards the focus on that crime. As you will know, Nick, part of that is just bodies on the ground. We're almost touching halfway now to our 20,000 extra police officers, which is great news. Because they're new, most of them will be in uniform and on the streets, which means they can get in amongst those neighbourhoods that are blighted by ASB. And we had Antisocial Behaviour Week last week, and a number of police and crime commissioners, not least my own here in Hampshire, launched task forces to look at this issue. You know, Nick, as well as I do, that crime changes and adapts, and we have to do the same. And that's what we're doing on ASB from here on in.
All right. Talking about the performance of the police officers, you said this earlier this morning on Sky News.
Focusing on crime, making sure that police officers feel supported and valued, that there are lots more of them out there, is a key part of our mission, and that's what we want to promote today.
Minister, police officers feel supported and valued. They had a vote of no confidence in your boss, the Home Secretary, last week. You're not giving them a pay rise. How, for the love of all that's holy, is that making them feel supported and valued? I don't understand.
Well, look, I understand, Nick, that the decision on pay was a tough one, and I totally appreciate the disappointment and indeed anger. Don't forget that officers at the lower end of the scale are still getting a pay rise, and any officer who's not at the top of their pay band will still get progression pay, which is equivalent to about 2%. But look, the Treasury have got to balance the ability of the private sector to pay with the service we want from the public sector, and that was a fine decision that was taken. There are other things, a finely balanced decision that was taken. There are other things that we could do to make police officers feel valued and supported. So you will know, later in legislation this year, we've got the Police Covenant coming, which is looking at wellness, safety, family support to make sure police officers feel that we're looking after them physically and mentally as they do their challenging job. Obviously, we're making sure there are lots more of them to get out there and shoulder the burden more widely. So there's lots that we could do. But look, I understand that.
Mr. Malthouse, if I might call you that. Mr. Malthouse, are you living in a parallel universe? For only the second time in history, there was a vote of no confidence against a serving Home Secretary by the Police Federation of England and Wales. Days later, that next Home Secretary says that we're going to crack down on crime, I'll make yobs clean the street, and we want police officers to work even harder. Do you even listen to the news?
Well, I do, Nick. And as I say, it was a very unfortunate decision by the Police Federation to do that, not least, obviously, because the public sector pay freeze has been advertised some time before. And there are still, as I say, some officers who will get pay rises who are not at the top of their pay band or indeed are at the very lower end. So I'm sorry. But look, I recognise it's tough. Our job is to take these tough and difficult decisions. But what I'm trying to say is that it's not all bad news. There's lots of good stuff happening out there in policing. We've had two of the biggest financial settlements for some time over the last few years. We know there's another 8,000 police officers to come in allocations going forward. And we're making huge strides on the primary mission, which is dealing with crime and disorder. So I was out on the day in South Wales on a tour talking to police officers. While pay was raised with regret a couple of times, most police officers raised with me how important and dedicated they were to their mission, and it was very heartening to see. But look, it's been a tough week. I understand that, on the back of a tough year.
How are you and your colleagues going to make yobs clean the streets, as the headline screams out this morning, Minister? So
one of the tools at our disposal, Nick, is what we call unpaid work, which is where criminals are effectively sentenced to do community service or indeed to do unpaid work after they've served their time inside. Because we're bringing probation back in-house, it means we're able to take a much more kind of coherent and impactful approach towards that unpaid work. And so what we want to do is to consult with local communities about what they believe offenders should be doing in their community. And we've seen some great examples across the country, groups of offenders clearing up woodland, picking litter, making sure areas are tidy and neat. And we want to make it visible so that reparations in local communities can be seen and felt.
But what happens? I am a yob and I refuse to tidy up the streets. What punishment will I face?
Well, if you don't comply with your sentence, you'll obviously be put back in front of the court and sentenced accordingly again. Right. I mean, obviously, community centres and unpaid work is a part of your sentence. And like any offender, if you fail to fulfil your sentence, then you'll face consequences.
Now, in writing in one of the newspapers on the weekend, the Sunday Express, your boss, the Prime Minister, said that everybody who's a victim of crime would have a police officer assigned to that particular incident. Do you support that idea, Minister?
I do, and in fact, It's already in what's called the Victims' Charter, the Victims' Code, which will be making statutory later this year.
While I wouldn't expect you to know how many crimes were committed in England and Wales last year, I'll help you with that. It's 5.4 million. You'll know how many police officers broadly there are across the 43 forces for England and Wales, won't you, Minister?
Yes, at the moment, yes.
And what's the number there?
So at the moment, police officers, we've got about 136,000 is the last declared number.
That's 133,000. That's pretty impressive. Minister, that works out at 41 crimes per officer. How is that to be managed?
Well, as I say, Nick, obviously,
it's nonsense. It's a headline-grabbing stunt by a very, very prolific and proficient journalist. It's got the headlines. In reality, it boils down to a Mary Poppins promise or a pie crust promise. Easy to make, easy to break.
No, it's not the case, Nick. So, for example, you are, in theory, supposed to be able to go onto police.uk, put in your postcode, and find the named police officer in your area who's responsible for your neighbourhood. I've done it here in Hampshire. I've done it for my office in London to make sure it's working. Not all police forces have got there. We want to make sure that everybody is on police.uk and that everybody can find their named neighbourhood officers with contact details. And that's been part of the warp and weft for some time. And in the Victims' Code, you will have a right, as your case proceeds, if it proceeds, and not all do proceed, don't forget, that if it proceeds, you will have the right to have a named officer. Now, that officer might change from time to time because people retire or they go on a holiday. But in the end, Nick, you know that all policing is based on a relationship with the public. And the most critical relationship is that with victims. We want to hear an end to this. Well, I won't bother to report it because nothing happens, or I never hear back. We don't want that. There's a basic expectation about customer service that needs to be improved, and that's what we're trying to do. OK, lastly, while I have the benefit of you on the line, one story that's not to do with crime is the latest on the so-called pingdemic. The next tranche of critical workers has been revealed. Going to be people who are working in the fish industry, in space, in communications and HMRC. Still, no religious figures, Minister. So the taxman is free, but the vicar or rabbi is not. Why? Well, Nick, I'm afraid I'm not close to the science around that particular decision. But look, what we've tried to do, and we have only got another couple of weeks to go to August the 16th, when hopefully the numbers, God willing, the numbers will allow us to say that if you're double vaccinated, you don't have to isolate. But what we're trying to do is have constant conversations with industry about critical areas and balance the risk of contagion against releasing the economy.
But how come the tax inspectors and the fishermen can walk free, but a rabbi or an imam or a priest cannot? I don't understand.
Well, because obviously fishermen in particular...
Does Boris not do God?
Fishermen are particularly part of the food supply chain, so it's very important that we maintain that. And we've been talking to the food supply industry about making sure that they've got the people they need. Frankly, I'm afraid, as they say, what are the two certainties in life? Death and taxes. Taxes need to be collected too. But look, we're in constant conversation with these people about where the critical points are. I was questioned at the weekend about airports and the impact on airports of the pandemic. And I said that the Department of Health and Transport would be in conversation with airlines about what they needed to make sure they were overcome some of the problems. But we've only got a couple of weeks to go now, Nick. Okay. Hopefully, fingers crossed, all will be well for 16.
Well, before I let you go, you referenced Hampshire. I have the benefit of seeing you talking to me, what's called down the line on a video link. Do you use your house for Midsummer Murders? It looks like a set from a Midsummer Murder with that casement window. It would be perfect, Minister.
I am extremely lucky to live in easily the most beautiful constituency in the country. And it won't surprise you to know that during recess, I spend a lot of time here. I've got some business to do here later today, but I'm very lucky.
And the name of your cat who's appeared on national television?
Well, I'm afraid, Nick, I'm very sorry to tell you that our cat died.
Well, what was that cat to your left-hand side earlier? Or was it a dog? There was an animal.
It was a dog, sorry. Oh, we've got a dog, yes. Our dog is called Paco.
It's called what? Paca?
Paco, P-A-C-O. It's a Spanish name. Paco.
Okay.
He's a rough collie acquired about 8 months ago.
Oh, you should have held him up to camera. He looked adorable, kid.
I know. Well, you know me, Nick. I'm not a great one for exploiting my kids or animals. But no doubt he'll make an appearance.
Yeah, anything to enhance the photo shot that you're in, Mr. Malthouse, I would suggest is an idea. Always good speaking with you, Kit Malthouse, appearing here on LBC. Thank you very much. For the time is 3 minutes after 8. We'll get the news.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Boris Johnson is due to set out his plans to tackle crime in England and Wales, including a permanent enhancing of stop and search powers. The strategy will also see the Greater Manchester Force test the benefit of sending an officer to every reported burglary. And there'll be a promise to provide victims